Welcome back to Rad Dads, a podcast where I, Micah Sherman, interview some of the coolest dads I know who have a big heart for their families and an even bigger love for Jesus. Today's episode, I have the privilege of interviewing a new friend of mine who has a unique perspective of being a dad of all boys. Our verse of the episode is from Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous, do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Grab your coffee, let's get started. Welcome back to the third episode of Rad Dads. Excited to interview one of my friends, Ben Mayberry, today. So welcome, Ben.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And Ben is, we're just really becoming friends. We go to church together and are starting a home group together. Ben and his wife are hosting their beautiful home, and then my wife and I are kind of facilitating and leading the group. And so it's a privilege to hear a little bit more of your story today. So going to the scouting report. The scouting report, Ben, is where I get to kind of brag about you. So I've done my research a little bit, and then you can verify if it's actually true or not.
Sounds good.
So Ben works in asset management at Bacchus Capital Group, LLC.
Yeah, Abacus.
Abacus, all right.
Yeah, no worries.
You got to pronounce it right. You went to USC Marshall School of Business.
That's correct.
All right. And then one of your favorite people gave me some more info. She said you are a master chef. You love to care for people by cooking exceptional food. We literally just poured marinade in your tri-tip, right?
Exactly, yeah. That was part of our plan to make it look like I...
Right, yeah, you knew it was coming.
Cook. Exactly.
He is very creative with construction and design. And then your wife, I asked her what 4 characteristics, if she could describe you were. And she said caring, smart, funny, and generous. So she's a big fan of you.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah, she's a fan. That's a good sign. And what I'm most excited about before we get into the interview is she also mentioned you have a pretty cool party trick for someone to give you a year, and then you'll tell them who the president of that year was.
That is correct.
Should we give it a shot?
I think so. There's
okay.
a little nervous under pressure.
Yeah, we'll totally edit it out if you aren't able to do it, but I think you will.
All right.
Okay, so here's the year. We'll do two of them.
Okay.
So we got 1877.
So the election of 1876 was Tilden Hayes election, and it ended up going to Rutherford B. Hayes.
You got it, Rutherford B. Hayes. Well done. Okay, all right, let's do one more. Man, I just want to do all of these. Let's go a little bit different. Okay, here we go. 1974.
1974 was Nixon still, I believe. He was elected in 72, and then might be Ford by that point because of Watergate. I think right on the border.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Nixon 73, Gerald R. Ford is 74. So how did you even acquire that skill?
So it's funny, I was not a wonderful student in high school, and just strangely the way I remember things is chronological and like on a timeline. Okay. So did history like everyone else. Not a lot stuck, but strangely, all the presidents stuck right by year. So maybe
that's impressive.
A weird idiosyncrasy about the way my brain works. I don't know.
Yeah, my studying skills were memorize it all right before, and then do the test, and then it would all leave right after. So yeah. That's impressive that it stuck.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, maybe if you can start, Ben, just telling us a little bit, since I've kind of given you a background to our listeners of who you are. Tell us a little about your family and maybe even the ages of your kids.
Yeah. So, Katie and I have been married since 2010. We have 3 kids that are ages 9, 7, and the youngest just turned 5 just this last week. So they're all almost exactly 2 years and 2 months apart. Not by plan particularly, but just the way it worked out. I guess speaking more big picture about my background, I am also one of 3 kids. I grew up here in Orange County where we are today. my siblings, I have an older sister who's very close to me in age. She's just 16 or so months older than me, and a younger brother who's 3.5 years younger. So grew up in a family of three and now have three kids. I think the way that I grew up with my parents and my siblings has largely informed the way that we try to raise our kids. I think that's always the case, some combination of my kids and my experience growing up, as well as my wife's experience growing up. We, of course, modified for today's world, which of course offers really different challenges as parents than I think it did growing up in the 1980s and 90s. But that's a little bit of background on us.
Cool. Yeah, and you have all boys.
Yep, all three boys, exactly.
All three boys, cool. And this, so if you've listened to our podcast so far, we had Brett McCracken kind of launch our podcasts off through the year, and then Andrew Scher spoke about being an expectant dad. So we're kind of taking a pause from the family just kind of ages, and Ben's going to talk a little bit about being a boy dad and what all that entails. Did you ever see yourself having three boys, and was that a surprise? Was that something you hoped for?
We did not spend a lot of time thinking in advance, I think, or maybe my wife did. I certainly did not spend a lot of time thinking in advance about whether or not it would be boys or girls. Mm-hmm. I have always wanted to be a father. I think I really value my relationship with my dad. I think my dad is unquestionably had the biggest influence on my life and the life of my brother, I know. So we didn't give it a lot of thought, but very, very happy the way it worked out. There's a funny thing that happens, I think, when you have the first boy, whatever you have, boy or girl, you have this really unique experience. It transforms your life. And then you find out, your wife's pregnant for number two. There's a small part of you that is kind of wants the same thing again. I think everyone talks about once you have the boy, you want the girl. For me, I enjoyed so much the process of having my first son. I thought, it'd be sweet to do it again. Mm-hmm. So, and even with the third one, where most people, would say, you're disappointed. You got another boy, number three. Were you hoping for the girl?
Right.
I'd always say, there's a part of me that wants that experience, but there's also just this idea that there's, one more person, a little like the last, but of course a little different.
Yeah. And you said you came from a family of three?
Yep.
So you have a family or kids of three siblings.
Yeah.
So that's, I feel like that often happens too, is like you kind of want what your experience was, or maybe it's the complete opposite. You didn't like that, but it sounds like you had a good experience with having two siblings too.
It did. It was, it's incredibly different. The difference between girls and boys, and I'm sure we'll get into this, it's dramatically different.
Yeah. So
it's, my family of three boys is very, very different than my experience growing up with my sister, who is very, she's calm even for a girl. And so there's, it was a different energy level and just a very different social dynamic. But yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So paint us a picture, since you just mentioned that, there's definitely a difference between girls and boys. What does being a boy dad kind of paint the picture for us in the Mayberry home look like?
Yeah, the thing that's so funny about it is how different each of them are, but yet the common experiences that they have here in this household create certain overlapping interests and activities. So, my boys, they look shockingly different. I think very few people would peg them for siblings. Sure. You can tell me if you agree with that. A lot of people
I agree, yeah.
That's funny that those kids are siblings. They're very different looking, and they're incredibly different personalities. Mm-hmm. So the oldest one, Clive, who's named after C.S. Lewis, is very much like my wife, I think, in nature. He is, and also falls into certain stereotypes for firstborn sons, or firstborn kids in general. He is generally very well behaved publicly. Mm-hmm. He's very calm. He's observant. Mm-hmm. My second son, Winston, who certain people in my family will describe him as being, they'll say he's more Ben than Ben is. So there's aspects of him where he's the most like me, both the way he looks, and sounds and the way his brain works. He's a lot of energy, very little filter on him. Mm-hmm. He's the one that's always delivered the most interesting. He says the funniest things, in part because he just says everything he thinks. So I often think that they're all thinking funny things. He gives voice to it.
Right.
And
you said most of your stories are from him.
Yeah, all the funny sayings. Yeah, my larger family calls them Winstonisms.
Oh, I love it.
The things that he says is just he takes from what he is experiencing in school or in church, and he applies it into his life, and the way he does it is just consistently hilarious and slightly off kilter, not quite what people intended, but manifests itself in a really entertaining way. Mm-hmm. And then the little guy Marty is, I guess in some ways, he feels like the biggest sort of product of the environment, because growing up, the stage had been set quite a bit, the way we spent our time, the activities they do, the energy, pre-existed before he arrived. And so he is, but he is definitely has the energy and will not be overlooked in anything that happens. So he's a lot of energy. There's a lot of temper there, but he's also a very charming kid and a very bright kid. So he's different than the others and at the same time a product of the environment.
Yeah, we just had our home group at your house when Ben was out for business, but my daughter noticed, Clive. He's like, the other boys are, they got a lot of energy and they're bouncing around. And then Clive is just kind of quiet and reserved and kind of does his own thing. And then you have Winston and Marty that are just bouncing and screaming and just so excited and super expressive. And but it was fun to be with them and kind of see those characteristics come out.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. How about just like outside of the house with like things that you guys do together, things that like as your boys are boys that you guys see yourselves doing a lot?
Yeah, I mean, activity-wise, the boys do sports. They all adore baseball. And it's funny because I have heard that this happens when a father is really into baseball and will get his sons into it, and it's something they enjoy together. And I must admit, I am not a big athlete. I certainly am not a big baseball fan. I enjoy baseball games. I've always liked going, but my boys are. It's a weird interest in baseball. The kind of thing where we'll go. I mean, we're talking about 5, 7, and 9. These are usually that's an age where you have trouble concentrating on anything for a period of time. If we go to a baseball game, the kids will post up and not talk for 2-3 hours straight, just staring at it. Occasionally asking me rules, and I've got Wikipedia up there, trying to answer the questions.
Right.
But they're just very unusual that way. But they're all competitive and they love, sports are a big thing. The oldest boy Clive does gymnastics. And he actually is in a competitive gymnastics league, and that's also funny. Again, a sport I had no experience with.
Right.
But he did it when he was little, and he was pretty good at it and kept being interested. He has very good power of concentration and is well behaved. And he's like my wife. He is willing and excited to do every activity.
Yeah.
So, when I think about it, folks that might be listening to this podcast, maybe people who have boys if they're younger, I think it's important to realize just how different every kid is.
Right.
And so you might listen to this and say, that's nothing like my kid. I would tell you probably a little bit more like my second kid. Than my first. They're just different.
Yeah.
Clive again, the oldest son, he's a little bit unusual. He had pretty significant speech delay. He didn't speak really until he was almost 3.5. Okay. So, with a brother that's 2 years younger, they kind of began speaking at the same time, interestingly.
Yeah.
Although Clive is very bright, and does really well in school today, you would never really know that he had a speech impediment. Yeah. I think it's there's something about that period of being slow to speak began as sort of ability to concentrate and sort of long periods of watching and observing, and it just makes him, he's unusual. I think Winston's a much more typical little boy.
Yeah. It sounds like you guys have kind of like given opportunity for them to try different things, seen what they like, and then like supported them as they continue to be interested or not.
We would
kind of.
I think we hope that that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Not sure we're always successful. That's what we try to do.
Yeah.
The baseball, anyone that is trying to figure out an activity for their boys, I do recommend this. We have an app that kind of will fire over when there's fire sale ticket prices like the day before.
Cool.
So like we'll get tickets to, that will be $4 or $5, to go to the Angels game. And it doesn't hurt that the Angels are no good, and it doesn't hurt when they're playing a pretty bad team. I don't know if this will be a long-term solution for us, but in the meantime, it's amazing. It's kind of, you almost can't, you almost couldn't go get frozen yogurt for that price.
Right. Yeah.
Although I kind of blow the whole thing up when I go in there, and I'll get a $17 beer while I'm watching.
Sure.
It kind of messes up the formula, but if you play it right, it can be amazing. And
that's cool.
I have told my kids that. I say, Daddy pays for the most expensive seat so we can sit higher than everyone else.
That's right, yeah.
And look down. And so I think there will be a reckoning at some point when they realize, what's
the nosebleeds
really
aren't the best seats.
Exactly. But right now they'll be, looking up there, looking down, feeling good.
Right.
Feeling sorry for all the people down in the front row.
Yeah. But it's still what an experience. So they can see everything. So it's really your perspective that you're giving them. And like when, they don't get to do this every day. So it's still an awesome experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. And I have to say, Ben, so I serve in our children's ministry at church, and I enjoy having your kids. They're well behaved. They've got lots of energy, but I can tell you guys have put a lot of work into they know when it's time to, pivot and okay, now it's story time. They're ready. And so I just want to say you guys are doing great, because I enjoy teaching your kids, and it's not always the case. I'm a teacher, so there's students that are a little more difficult to teach, and other ones that are just easier and they're ready to learn.
That's sweet of you to say.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's ups and downs on that. But
sure, but no, they're great kids. So cool. So moving on, what would you say are some traditions? Rhythms or experiences. You said you had a good relationship with your dad that he maybe did with you guys that you have wanted to or are continuing with your kids, and then maybe are there other things you're I want to try this a little bit differently that you've done with your kids? Yeah.
So my dad, like I mentioned, was by some margin the most influential person in my life, and it's funny these days. I will laugh. I hear myself. I almost hear thoughts in my head that sound like something my dad would say all the time, and I'll joke with my wife. I'll say sometimes, I think I'm just turning into my dad, or maybe my brain is turning into my dad's, or something like that. And she doesn't disagree. She laughs, but she likes my dad a lot, so that's a good thing. My dad was more old-fashioned in the sense that he played less of a role in my life when I was really little.
Sure.
And a big piece of that is his workload. He was worked in accounting, worked very, very long hours, and so he was much less influential, I think, when I was a little kid. Okay. Plus, my mom was a kindergarten teacher, and so she was just in her element with kids age kind of 2 through 5. So what I have done so far in the way that I'm involved with my kids' life is largely a response more to my wife, who is not as much like my mom. Neither one of us were children-oriented at all. In fact, interesting fact, I was thinking about this recently, neither my wife nor either one of us had ever even babysat at the point at which we had kids. So we, it was like a lot of being around children was entirely new.
Yeah, right.
And for anyone that's listening and is either, they have a kid on the way or a young kid, or they're considering kids, just know that, you don't need to have had that experience.
That's good to know.
One of the wonderful things about kids is when they come out, you're not, you're not babysitting a 5-year-old on day one, right? They come
Right.
out, and there's a way in which, you can attest to this.
Yeah.
There's right when they arrive, like it's disruptive to your sleep, but it's not actually disruptive to what you do day to day. So if you're getting together with your friends, on a weekend, you just bring that baby along.
That's right.
And the transition from where their world dominates you, from you dominating them to them dominating you, occurs like it's strangely below the radar. It just kind of happens one day, and all of a sudden you realize
It's not right away.
Yeah, it's very much. It's not shocking in that way. It's more. I think it's more shocking to your sleep and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so to answer your question, my dad became much more influential as I became older, as I went through my junior high and teenage years. My dad is, in some ways, he's a little bit of a pessimistic person, but he's also, I think the word that comes to mind with him is wisdom, and he's a intellectual and a man of wisdom, and so he has, with any experience that I had, he had an incredible ability to hold it in context. So he helped me if I was sad or insecure. He could provide examples in history or in his own experience. He always had an experience to place in context what I was going through. And so this is something I hope I can do for my kids.
Yeah.
I'm a pretty low emotion, stable. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but I'm not prone to strong emotion.
Overreact.
Just kind of calm, and so I don't always relate to the ups and downs that people go through. And so I hope that I will be able to meet my kids where they are as they go through things, particularly in like those sort of teenage years, and help them hold things in context.
Yeah.
And that's something my dad did for me.
That's awesome. That's a huge, I feel like, tool on your tool belt that you're able to bring to your family. And how about as far as doing things differently, there's things that you really enjoyed about your dad that he kind of taught you. How about things that you see that you guys do differently in your family?
Yeah, I think a big difference is the difference in the relationship that I have with Katie versus the relationship my dad had with my mother. We're such different people that it informs where we allocate our resources, what we do on a day-to-day basis with our kids. Katie and I are both very high activity people, and I think it's a lot of the reason why we sort of found each other and wanted to be married to each other is a shared view of just the amount of activity in our lives. My parents were more traditional in the sense that my dad was very much the breadwinner, and my mom very much sort of ran the operation at home. My wife and I have things mixed up, just mixed up a little bit more in terms of the dividing of domestic tasks and the sort of volunteer activities outside of the home. So I think that will have probably the biggest impact on our kids. And our kids, when I was growing up, myself and my sister particularly were kind of homebodies. We enjoyed being home and make-believe games, and my kids are much more interested in the programming that's available to them, whether or not that's at church or at school. They're just more involved. So in many ways, it's not a difference of sort of values or like some sort of lessons learned from my family, or it's more just a response to all the different characters in the story.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I feel like I see that in the difference just of our generation compared to our parents. Now there's very much more defined roles with our parents and maybe even our grandparents. And for better or for worse, it worked. That's kind of how we were raised. But I think I see that a lot more now as parents. There's a lot more shared responsibility across the board with parenting and house, everything that goes around the house, that I think is a good thing.
Yeah. I think it's also just a response to the way the professional world works today. I mean, there's the ability to, with technology, people can be in different places. It just changes the landscape a little bit.
Yeah.
And so certainly with my wife was, when we had kids, she now is effectively, I guess you would say, a stay-at-home wife, but she had a career in digital marketing beforehand that was kind kind of probably more defining experience prior to having kids. And she worked when our kids were little. She continued to work in that world, sometimes from home, sometimes in a sort of consulting capacity. And it's just a different arrangement than what was available to you 30 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. Taking a pause from just kind of the boy dad questions. I know you travel for work, sometimes a couple days at a time. So I was wondering if you could kind of give some helpful advice on any dads who are in kind of that kind of work. How do you do that work, but also kind of leave well to your work and supporting your wife and maybe even your kids and maybe saying goodbye? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So one thing that's an advantage for me is, generally speaking, this is not always the case, but generally speaking, my traveling is just one night away at a time. That makes it much easier.
Yeah.
I'll say goodbye to the kids. A lot of times I'll say goodbye to the kids at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, jump on an airplane, get to some hotel, wake up in the morning, have a long day there, and then I come home and they've usually gone to bed by that next night, but it's really one day away.
Okay.
It's really my wife and I have gotten into a rhythm that where we can make this work. That's what you have to do, is come up with some way of doing that. We definitely take advantage of time with her parents. She will frequently see her parents are local here in Santa Ana. She'll frequently see them when I'm gone. Sometimes my parents. So it's about having, and then we just have close friends, as you know, from church that are all around us in the neighborhood. So there's a lot of spending time with other people when we're out. It would be a different challenge if I was traveling. It was a different challenge, I should say, when the kids were a little younger. It was more about, there was less trying to get kids to locations and more about kind of the loneliness of me being gone. Yeah. Now the kids are so all absorbing that she certainly isn't lonely when I'm gone. I think, but she has a heroic level of energy and ability to deal with these things. So I think it's different for everyone how you work.
Sure, yeah, and it sounds like you have the community that when you're gone, they don't. Not that they don't miss you, but it's not as big a void because there's other people pouring in and available to
absolutely
love and support your wife and your family or your boys. Great. So your wife, Katie, who being your boy's mom is obviously the most important woman in their life right now. What does that kind of look like, being a boy dad, a house of 4 boys, one lady? What does it look like kind of teaching them to love and respect that woman in their house, their kind of first woman in their lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the pieces of just brilliant irony is that Katie is a certain version of a feminist that not like burn the bra at the rally kind of thing. Yeah. But she has had a heart for women. She has worked in nonprofits that focus on human trafficking and especially with sort of sex slavery and stuff like that. So she has always been an advocate for women in different ways. Even before I met her, she was involved with, again, a different nonprofit. It was about sort of advancing women. So that is a little ironic that she, God placed three little boys in her life. So it's in that sense it's a little bit of a funny dynamic. She also is she is from a family of 3 girls.
Oh, really?
So she actually did not have. She only had her father in her life as an example of a boy. Yeah,
opposite.
But yours is a great question because it's when you have 3 boys, there ends up being a lot of people running around naked, a lot of burping. There's a lot. We kind of let these things slide, but there's a few things we do. We have tried to be very aggressive about making sure that they are learning manners. The oldest kid does something called cotillion. Are you familiar with this?
I did cotillion.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
no kidding.
And I enjoyed it.
That's funny. Yeah. So I think that's really neat. They learn to all kinds of ways to interact with girls in a way that is polite.
Cool.
Pull the chair out, let them sit down first,
Right.
maintain eye contact when they're sitting down, that sort of thing. I wouldn't describe myself as as a particularly well-mannered person, but my wife is. She will go to great effort to set expectations for the boys, make sure that they understand that she is not just their homie here in the house, that sort of thing. So she does a nice job of that. And I think she does. I think I will do a bigger piece of that probably as they get a little bit older. But right now she's the driver quite a bit on that.
They know that she's not dad.
She's
mom.
That's exactly right.
That's cool.
And she's also, just physically, I wrestle more with them. I carry them around and throw them around. There's a from the time they're very little, there's a sense that there's a different sort of physical expectation.
My son is 1.5, and I'm not saying this is what every family should do, but I tell him each day, because he's a little more aggressive than our daughter. He wants to get physical, and right now he's hitting, which we're working on. But I tell him, you can hit daddy. You can hit daddy is all you want. But you never hit mommy, and you never hit sister. And when he does that, I make sure he knows, and I lock eyes with him. You never do that. And just to speak about, there is a difference of how you relate with mom and dad and sister. It's important to make that distinction.
I think that's great. With that, and having a sister there also, creates a really a clear dynamic right there.
Right.
So it's a good point. I mean, that's you got to kind of find alternative ways to do that when there's no sisters. But we do have my boys have 3 cousins that they're pretty close with who are all girls. My sister has 3 girls. Okay. And that are just slightly older than my 3 boys, and so they're around them all the time. And I think there's a recognition. At least the older two are also not physical, so it's a newer issue we're dealing with. The youngest one is has much more instincts for throwing a punch, than the older two.
Sure. Awesome. As the boys get older, and I'm trying to think as the boys get older, what would you say are, kind of ending with this one question-wise, the most important values you hope to instill in them as they someday become young men? If there's, certain maybe 3 or 4 that you think, all right, these are the ones that we're really kind of focusing on.
Yeah, I think there's one that just I think dominates over everything else as being critical for raising boys in our society today, and that's just bravery. There's all kinds of ways that my kids are learning. They are learning today what is right and wrong. They will know what's right and wrong, and then the question will be, will they have the bravery to apply it when the time comes?
Yeah, right.
And I think when I think about the times we live in today and the way that their value system will be different than the culture they grow up in, it will, depending on what they do, it will take bravery on a daily basis to stand for what they believe in, and to stand up for other people in society, when those moments come, and the aspects of culture that are secular and destructive are entering into the lives of those people around them.
Yeah, very awesome. Any other ones?
Yeah, I mean, under the various subcategories of character, honesty obviously is up there too. I think that overlaps with bravery, whether they have the strength and the bravery to tell the truth.
Yep.
I think what I hope for my children is wisdoms, to be knowledgeable and to know, to be able to recognize what is truth in a distorted world as well. And then also just, I hope that there is a desire to pursue what's beautiful, both in what they do professionally and what they do academically, as they get older,
Yeah.
to kind of lock eyes with what is beautiful, what God has given us for this time on earth, and to pursue it and pull it into their lives and pull it into the lives of the people around them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like faith plays a role in teaching them those kind of categories?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's the sort of beginning and the end of identifying that, I think. So it's, we could talk, we could probably talk for another hour about how you achieve that. My kids the older two attend a classical school. It's a small private school that is very sort of reform Protestant in its theology, but it is the main purpose is to be able to take from the world and learn what is true and beautiful, and commit it to memory, put it in your heart, and learn how to think and sort through that. And that's something that's worked out for our family. It's ended up being a really nice home for our older two boys. But not everyone has that available or around them.
Sure.
So I think for other people who are in the faith and trying to figure out how their boys are going to navigate these things, I think you gotta find a community of people that share those values and help you identify it. And of course, learning Scripture, committing Scripture to heart gives you the ability to hear God's voice, and then the being discerning about when you expose your kids to worldly things, I think is key. Making sure that they're equipped with tools to sort through it. Yeah, I don't know if this is something that we're getting right. But with the oldest kid up until age 7 or 8, there's not a huge gap in the way the secular world is generally raising their kids versus you, right? Yeah. Because even today, if you're raising your kid, you're trying to avoid technology. Well, you know what? The secular world is trying to avoid technology now for kids. Like that's the consensus that's been achieved. But there becomes a world where, and you kind of start seeing this in I can see this on their baseball teams and competitive sports where the value system, the value of sort of getting what's right for me, even if it's like arguing with the referees or mistreating the coaches and the players and stuff, you can kind of observe that. And my kids, who have been largely in a very protected private school, in a very sort of theologically conservative church environment, encounter very few adults who don't agree with their parents on everything.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So now we're entering this world of where we're kind of dribbling in experiences into their life, where they can see it and hopefully have the maturity for me to have a conversation and say, hey, I've always told you, listen to every single adult. Well, now that's not 100% true. Now it's time to talk a little bit about how you might have adults in your life that are not, that just do not share our values. And so I don't think that we have figured out how to do that. A lot of it, we're trying our best. I think, and seeking a lot of advice on how to do this from people who are thoughtful. Yeah, right. But it's one of those things that I think every Christian family is going to face when they're raising boys.
Yeah, and I like what you said about like teaching them to have that skill of like, at some point, like being able to discern what is right and wrong. And I think that's one of the biggest tasks of parenthood is we really have to take that responsibility. That's not somebody else's job. We can't like pawn that off of somebody else, and they'll help a little bit, hopefully, but like owning that as parents of like teaching them, like it's our job to teach them, okay, what is right and wrong. And so that when they come out of that bubble that we've, protected them for a while, which has its, time and age, that they can discern that, and when starts to become those differences of belief, I guess.
My parents, shared with me, after when I was a little bit older, they were talking about the way that kids are different and how you have to do that differently with different personalities. They said of me, I was kind of iconoclastic, and anytime anyone would try to tell me how things were, I would just kind of take the opposite side of it, of every issue. And so they didn't worry about putting me sort of leaving me hovering around in a hyper-secular environment because I would be kind of iconoclastic.
Naturally.
Yeah, naturally. And my middle kid is like that, you know. He's you can kind of see that tendency already.
Sure, yeah.
The oldest one is, you know, he wants to please everyone around him. He wants to please his teachers. He wants to please his friends.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, it comes from there's wonderful things associated with that, but then you just have to equip them, to apply wisdom differently.
Totally, yeah.
And I don't know if we're doing this right. I think we've identified some goals on what we want to do, but it's the beginning of a journey on that.
Yeah. Just like you said in the beginning, it will have its time. You don't have to have it all figured out yet.
Yeah.
God's grace is through it, and He's bringing you through it to the points where it's like, okay, now it's time to have those conversations, and that could look differently with all three of your boys.
Yeah,
the timing of that.
Absolutely,
definitely cool. Well, thank you for your time today, Ben. Would you mind kind of closing us out in prayer, and specifically, obviously for dads, but maybe this dad is this episode is based on boy dads. Just praying for those dads who have all boys as they parent.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Dear Father, I thank you for this time here. It's my prayer that this conversation would be valuable to anyone who's listening and is raising boys. I pray that you would come into the lives of parents, that those who seek you would know you and find you, and that you would give strength and encouragement to parents who are struggling and trying to work through challenges with their sons and daughters. I pray that you would equip this generation of your followers to deal with the with the secular culture in any way that it's different, that they would see clearly through culture and recognize you from your word and know you and just pursue you in all things that they do, Lord. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Three episodes in and many more to come. If you like this episode, share it with a dad you know that you feel could use some encouragement. We are now on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you follow us on Spotify, hit that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. And if you follow us on Apple Podcasting and you like the episode, leave a 5-star review and follow our show as we continue this journey of fatherhood. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks for the coming episode of Rad Dads.